All right, you ready, friend? I mean, we can keep the other two topics. We can kind of elaborate a little bit longer on, and then we can just kind of throw that in like parsley.
Right.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Winning Drive podcast. I'm Rita Hubbard, the NFL chick, co-host of the Glenn and Rita Show on 105.7 The Fan, with my guy Cordell Woodland from Shaking It Up Sports and the Ravens reporter for 105.7 The Fan. Cordell, we know that the end of the season presser definitely happened. You were there in attendance to get the skinny scoop breakdown, whatever you want to call it, of things that happened in the AFC Championship game, as well as Eric DaCosta speaking about decisions that potentially may be made. So let's start first with the recap of the AFC Championship game. Obviously, there's a lot of quotes that had gone out. First one that was very interesting was John Harbaugh mentioning that the game plan was to essentially do a lot of RPOs and, they wanted to run the ball. And that obviously didn't happen. So when he says that, what were your immediate thoughts in terms of, okay, well, that essentially didn't happen?
Right. Yeah. I mean, when he mentions RPOs and things like that, I mean, that's all line of scrimmage stuff. That's
Yep.
quarterback reading it. So in one breath, he gives, names RPOs and things like that were in the game plan. But then he also comes back and he'll say, that he agreed with whatever Lamar was looking at because he saw the same fronts or he saw defenses setting up to stop the run. So it's like he throws it out there, but then he kind of retracts it in the same breath a little bit.
It almost felt like he low-key threw him under the bus. He just didn't use, verbiage that
it's
one
coach
would say. But, like you said, suggesting that they were going to use RPOs is absolutely allowing the quarterback to see what he sees and then make the decision on what it is that, he wants to do from there.
Right. So, I mean, I feel like, that's a part of this, Lamar and whatever he sees at the line of scrimmage, whatever he decides to do in RPOs, whatever he decides to do pre-snap, whether he stays in the play that's called or changes it. I don't know. That's all a part of what's on his plate. It's, that he has control of this offense. So yeah, I mean, it shouldn't be just a John Harbaugh thing to begin with. It shouldn't just be a Todd Monken thing to begin with. It shouldn't just be a Lamar Jackson thing. It's all of these guys collectively. And just as much as everybody is saying John could have went to Todd and told him to run the ball more, which he possibly could have. We just don't know. I mean, that's another story in itself if he went and told them and they still didn't do it. But just in the same breath, Todd could tell Lamar, like, hey, look, we want to kind of lean on the running game a little bit to start this drive or whatever. We need to get something going. We need to get more balance. We have to kind of let the running game set up the passing game. So that type of communication should be there. Now, again, same thing. If Monken goes and says that to Lamar and Lamar still goes out there and checks out of every run play that they call, then that's a story in itself. So either communication isn't happening or communication is happening and it's being ignored. Something's going on in the process of how the play is called based off of, compared to when it's actually run. I don't know what's going on, but it's a multitude of reasons as to why I think they didn't run the ball as much as they should have in that game.
I agree with you. Too many people, I seen say, oh, well, they were giving looks. They were putting 8 people in the box or, whatever. And my response to that is, so what? So, everybody knows that the Ravens run the ball. You think that that's the first time that they saw 8 people in the box this season? Right. I'm pretty sure that they didn't. And ultimately, that's how you end up being the number one rush defense in the National Football League, is because you don't care what the other side is doing. You're going to do what you do, and you're going to bet on yourself and your ability to run the football versus play into the hands of whatever it is that the defensive side of the ball is doing. Running the ball keeps defenses honest, as we saw with the Chiefs, what they did in their game plan. It allows more flexibility in terms of your offensive scheme. I don't care if they had 10 people in the box, Cordell. I don't care. You have to keep defenses honest at all times. When you become one-dimensional, you don't win football games at any capacity. And look, it might be here and there that you get a couple of wins being one-dimensional, but you're not going to be that good as a team overall when your win-loss record comes to play. And that's the problem that I have, is that, okay, so you saw certain looks that were favorable to stopping the run. Gus Edwards could probably lean forward and get 2 to 3 yards, if he pushes, through the pile enough on his own, which now makes it second and, mid, or, second and a little bit more favorable than being second and 10, third and 10. And so that's the part that I think that I'm annoyed by the most, is that I don't care what they're doing. I don't care what they're doing. I'm going to do what got me here. And I don't like the fact that no one checked anybody. And look, it is very possible that, because, Harbaugh did say, he and Lamar talked about it. And I guess that they all, cool now or whatever. Fine. And it's not our business to know what that conversation was, because honestly, that is between the coach and his player. But what I do hope is that they both had a conversation and they learned that them not running the football was one of the biggest mistakes that they could possibly make in one of the biggest games that they've both had. Well, Harbaugh since 2013 and Lamar essentially in his career. Yeah. And that's all I can ask for.
And that conversation, that was the thing that really stuck out to me. It's, it's one thing to go away from the run, but their best weapon that they have on this team is Lamar's legs. And even that wasn't a big part of it. So that was the one thing, that was one of the things I asked John about, like, what happened to the Lamar runs, whether it's a scramble, whether it's a design run, where was that? And, he talked about him, and he mentioned how scrambling is a big part of what they do. Is what they want to do. He says all the right things. He talked about the conversation he and Lamar had and how they, like you said, hashed it out, and they saw things the same way and whatever. I mean, it is what it is at this point. He wasn't going to be able to say anything that was going to that was going to put people at ease at that end of the season press conference.
Correct.
That's the reality. I didn't go in there with the idea that John is going to come and say, you know what, you're all right. We should have run. I mean, I didn't know. I knew what he was going to say, and I knew it wouldn't be deemed acceptable to people. I mean, it is what it is. It's happened at this point, and he was asked about the run game multiple times in in various different ways, and if he's going to say what he's going to say. He's already got his mind made up, or he's been prepped of how to approach these press conferences. So he's going to hit his bullet points. He's going to and I'm not saying that what he's saying is lying. I think he's giving his truth. I think from his vantage point, he felt like the game dictated for them to go away. Not saying it's right, but just for him, that's his truth. And while at the same time, they would have to understand that people are just not going to accept whatever they come out and say, considering what's already happened.
Completely agree. Well, your truth was the wrong idea, as now you're sitting at home. One of the things that was talked about with Eric DaCosta was, obviously free agency things. He was kind of mum about the situation with Justin Madubuike, understandably so, because, there's the possibility that he could be franchise tagged, or, he can go to free agency. But it was a very interesting conversation about Ronnie Stanley and what he could potentially be doing in 2024. And I think it was kind of vague, because if you look at the public perception, Cordell, some people thought that his comments meant that he was going to return Stanley, and some people felt like his comments meant that he's essentially not the same player that he used to be, and they may be moving on. So what was your perspective when you saw or you heard his comments regarding Ronnie Stanley?
Yeah, I mean, I same thing. He wasn't going to give much. He didn't give much about any of these guys that are pending free agents or anybody that has anything contractual that they're planning to deal with this offseason. He was very mum about pretty much everything offseason wise, which again isn't a surprise. I get it. With Ronnie, I don't think that this is as easy of a decision as people are making it out to be. I think it's easy to look at Ronnie's year and see him splitting time this year and see him not look like his usual self most of the year and see him continuously dealing with lower body injuries that don't seem to be getting better. But on the same token, it's a lot invested in him. I know that they'll save about $15 million if they cut him after June 1st.
Correct.
But, it's a tough pill to swallow, number one, for the Ravens. And number two, I think there is the possibility, at least in their minds, that maybe Ronnie, a glimmer of Ronnie is still in there. He doesn't have to be all pro Ronnie. He doesn't even have to be Pro Bowl Ronnie, but a serviceable left tackle that you can depend on to protect your franchise quarterback's blind side is still in there somewhere. So I really wouldn't be surprised if Ronnie's back next year. I think that they're going to figure this whole thing out. I'm not optimistic about Ronnie necessarily taking a haircut or anything like that. I mean, Ronnie's a big time advocate for the Players Association. So I don't believe that that's going. We already see Ronnie using, his player given rights throughout the year when it comes to his practice schedule, when it comes to all of that stuff. So
one thing Ronnie gonna do is use his exercise his rights. I can't even be mad,
He sure will. So why would I think that's going to be any different when we're talking about the money aspect?
Yeah. I completely agree there. Was there anything else that stood out to you during that press conference?
Obviously that was kind of fresh right after Mike Macdonald got the job in Seattle. So Harbs mentioned how they wanted to keep Mike Macdonald in the building. He went as far as to pretty much say that they tried to keep him in the building, but Mike wanted that job, and for everybody out there that's like, oh, the Ravens should have just swapped out John Harbaugh and put Mike Macdonald in there. I don't even know if that was on the table. I mean, it may have been. I would imagine it wasn't for Mike to still not be here. And even if the Ravens, even if Bisciotti came to him like, yeah, you could be the coach in waiting, I don't blame Mike Macdonald for not taking that if that's what they offered. I don't know that that's what they did, but it just would make no sense to me if I'm Mike Macdonald to wait around for a head coach who still is pretty young when we talk about the grand scheme of an NFL head coach who just lost in the AFC Championship game. I mean, I know people are upset with Harbs right now, but the honest truth is Harbs is probably here. I don't know. We'll see what happens next year, how next year ends. But
very true.
Most people aren't getting fired after they have the type of year that the Ravens
correct.
Just had. So
correct. Sorry, doesn't happen.
Yeah, I have no problem with Mike Macdonald deciding to go elsewhere. At the end of the day, he wants more. He deserves more. Yep. So yeah, I mean, it kind of is what it is. That's the way the league works. If you got a coach that's that good, you're going to lose them eventually.
Absolutely. And we wish Mike Macdonald the best. While we're talking about Mike Macdonald, let's stick to more departures and changes here on Winning Drive. So in addition to the departure of Mike Macdonald, there has been other departures and other changes made. Obviously, the Ravens had to fill in the spot of defensive coordinator. And so they did that in-house with Zach Orr, who we all know was a former player whose career ended prematurely due to a neck injury. There's other guys. Denard Smith left as well. And then Anthony Weaver, who I thought a lot of people thought he would probably return. I started to feel like it was slim to none when Zach Orr was named defensive coordinator, left for the Miami Dolphins defensive coordinator job. So that is not counting Zach Orr because he's still with the Ravens, but that's 3 defensive departures that the Ravens have seen since the end of the 2023 season. So, there's been a lot of speculation about how you can see that going. And look, you hear the talks, you hear Zach Orr's talking, you hear the players talking. Cal Van Noy, has something positive to say once he got promoted. And, Zach Orr spoke and said, it's going to be a lot of hitting. And I was like, ooh, I don't know, friend, because they be out here giving flags. So don't hit too hard out there, friend. I get it. You want to be intimidating. Completely understand. Just don't overdo it because you know that they're going to flag you. But what do you foresee with all the changes that were made from a defensive perspective? How do you foresee this going? Because I can't not think, Cordell, that they won't have a little bit of a regression just because there's a different coordinator that wants to implement his game plan, which is going to probably be different than what Mike McDonald had. So, but they do have a lot of core players still. So I'm just curious to know your thoughts on how you could foresee this going.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I think regression is very likely. And it doesn't have to be major. I don't think that they're all of a sudden just going to be a bottom half of the league type of defense or anything like that. But they were just so good in general. Even if Mike McDonald was still here, I would say they could only go down. I don't know what else they could do based off of what they've been able to do over the last year and a half. That said, yeah, that it's going to look somewhat different, right? I mean, I would think, I'm curious to find, everybody's that I've talked to has made it seem like it's just going to be, not the same, but there won't be anything major. Even when I asked Tarbs about it, what type of wrinkle or what type of difference could we see with this Zach Orr defense, especially considering how good the Mike McDonald defense has been. I don't even know how different you really want it to look, but you want to allow your coaches to put their own fingerprint on it. So I'm sure there are going to be creative things that Zach Orr wants to implement, and a lot of things he'll probably want to keep. But look, they're going to lose some guys, especially those veteran edge rushers. Is back to relying on the young guys again, Owe and Ajabo, and it's kind of like, I don't know, we'll see, still with those guys. But like you said, you still have some your core guys. Matabike, I think, will still be on the team in some sort of capacity, franchise tag most likely. Roquan on the second level, Kyle Hamilton on the third level. Still have Marlon there for right now. Marcus is back there. Hopefully he could put together a healthy season. So they still have guys. I think the defense will be fine. And the good thing about Zach Orr is that he already has the respect of the players. He already has the guys' ear. He's a part of Ravens culture. He played here. He played in the league. It's set up perfect for him to kind of slide in and take over Mike McDonald, in which he's been a part of this defense the last 2 years as well. So it's not like he has to kind of learn this scheme all over. He already knows the scheme like the back of his hand. Now he can kind of just adjust on the fly. He can put his own fingerprint on there now to keep what he likes. So I think it's a slam dunk hire. With Weaver, it was what it was. It just seems like he gets passed up quite a bit in-house and outside. It was great to see him get that opportunity to be the Dolphins defensive coordinator. I think he'll be just fine out there. Losing Denard Wilson was huge too. I think Denard Wilson was their number one candidate to take over the defensive coordinator job. But I think with Mike McDonald's decision kind of going on as long as it did, I think that may have forced Denard Wilson's hand to go out there and take that Titans job. So the good thing for the Ravens is that they had a good in-house candidate in Zach Orr, who's young as well, 31 years old. I mean, my goodness, calling plays on the defensive side of the ball. And that'll be tough. That'll be the one adjustment you're looking for, is how is he calling plays, especially in critical situations, because he hasn't done that before. At least Mike McDonald had experience doing it out at Michigan. Zach Orr, he hasn't been a play caller before. So that'll be the one thing. But John said that that's what he's kind of working through right now.
Yeah. It will be very interesting how this goes. Like you say, he's 31 years old, so he's very young. You know what I mean? I mean, it allows him to, we were having these conversations about, Mike Macdonald potentially being the next apparent heir, even Anthony Weaver, a former Raven himself, being the next apparent heir. And now the possibility is, what if it's Zach Orr? He's also been a guy that's been with the organization for essentially his whole career. And so what if it works out that he's the guy that the Ravens want to mold and to develop into being the next guy, if when Harbaugh decides that he wants to, not coach anymore and do a front office situation. So I definitely think that it is something that to consider. It is definitely something to consider when you see, somebody so young. And look, Mike McDonald, he's had his, what's the word I want to use? He's moved around. I mean, he was the Ravens linebackers coach, left, went to Michigan to be their defensive coordinator, came back. So he's had his elevation at different levels, even. You know what I mean? He's had his ropes on the college level. Then he turned around and had his ropes at the NFL level. At some point, if he would have stayed, it would have only been for another year. He would have had to been offered the head coaching job with the Ravens, or he would have gone elsewhere. But this year, obviously, with the Triple Crown situation, was going to be the year that teams were going to be interested in McDonald. But with Orr and his resume in terms of how long he's been here, you could potentially see maybe it's him that's the next apparent heir to the franchise in terms of head coaching that they want to hold on to and say, this is the guy that we can make, we can keep in-house, and we can keep this guy being the next head coach. Oh, by the way, and listen, y'all gonna say, oh, here we go. But listen, this is politics matter in the NFL. Unfortunately, he's also Black. So that means you can potentially get a draft pick out of hiring a minority coach if he's the next man up. And that's something that Eric DeCosta, we know he loves, getting draft picks, right? So having him potentially be the next guy in line. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to get a draft pick for hiring this guy. To me, sounds like something that the Ravens probably thought about moving forward. I don't know. I mean, but I think that they're a very smart franchise, and they also understand the dynamics of everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of people that already respect Zach Orr and his young coaching career, and people do believe that he's on a fast track to becoming one of the new younger head coaches in the NFL. So it could definitely happen. I mean, that's why these guys are paid the big bucks, to kind of look down the line and kind of plan things out, map things out so that the future is bright. And they've shown that they've had quite a few good in-house candidates over the years. Wouldn't be surprised if Zach Orr ends up being the next great one for him. They also brought in Doug Mallory, that was the Michigan defensive analyst, to be their defensive backs coach to replace Denard Wilson as well. So we're seeing them start to piece this defensive staff back together a little bit. I wouldn't be surprised if Chuck Smith probably stays in the role he's in.
Right.
But they now have to figure out a new defensive line coach with Weaver gone, and essentially a linebackers coach now with Zach Orr getting the promotion.
Absolutely. So again, I definitely think that, anytime you have a change and this type of situation, it's going to be a little bit of a regression, because people are they're individuals. They're going to have their own individual philosophies. They're going to have their own individual schemes, and you expect that to potentially not hit right away, especially since NFL teams now don't really do a ton of preseason games now, and so they don't really start obviously playing into real action until week 1. So it might take a couple of weeks to adjust to what it is that they have. I do think that they still have the enough pieces to be a very good defense, but at first, might just take a time and a process of overhauling the old thing and then bringing in the new thing. But we want to congratulate Zach Orr for his promotion at defensive coordinator here on Winning Drive. There were some other potential moves, Cordell, that was supposed to happen but didn't happen. We'll talk about that here on Winning Drive. All right, Cordell. So there's been a seesaw of events in the past basically 24 hours where Jerry Rosburg, the Ravens' former special team coach who has been here for quite some time, we know he left and he ended up being the interim coach for the Denver Broncos at one point. There was plans to bring him back as a game time coordinator. And then today on Tuesday, they decided that no, that's not going to work. Not really sure what happened in terms of the change of heart, but it looks as of right now, Jerry Rosburg will not be joining the Ravens, at least in the capacity as the game managing coordinator. So there was a lot of interesting dialogue about this from the fan base. And essentially the biggest one was, well, what is the point of the head coach if he needs help with game time management? Now, I understand that people are still very salty about what they saw just a little over a week ago and that emotions are still running high. But I'm going to try to be a little logical here. It's not new for people in high places to have consultants. And I don't think that football is essentially any different in that regard, right? And so sometimes someone feels like they might need a second set of eyes. Maybe the AFC Championship game, he felt like he needed somebody to tap him on the shoulder and say, hey, what are y'all doing over there? Because y'all not running the football. That's what you're not doing. You know what I'm saying? And if you need somebody, Ravens, please give me a call. Call my agent. I absolutely can help y'all in that regard. I can tell y'all what y'all need to do out there. But if you want somebody with a little bit more of an NFL resume, I understand. You might want Jerry Rosburg instead. But apparently that's not going to happen. But the backlash originally regarding this potential situation was very interesting to me. I view this no different, again, than a CEO getting a consultant to help them be better. You didn't win the AFC Championship game. You can afford to be better. So I just don't know what the issue here is at hand. So maybe you can help me understand.
Well, I think for the crowd that has been calling for John Harbaugh's job, it fed that narrative that John doesn't do anything. It gives that illusion that he doesn't do anything. You've got an offensive coordinator who is in full control over the offense. You've got a defensive coordinator who's the play caller on the defense. He's a special teams coach type. John is a former special teams coach. So to the casual fan, John doesn't do anything because special teams doesn't matter. That's how people view special teams. And so you see him bring in Jerry Rosburg, or you see the report that Jerry Rosburg is close to getting a deal done with the Ravens to be in a quote game manager role. This was never verified or anything like that from the Ravens. So we don't know what type of role he was really coming in for. But like I said, it just fed the narrative that people already had, I think, towards John Harbaugh. And for me, I don't think it's a negative. The Ravens wouldn't have been the only team in the league that even has that type of person in that role. There are teams in the league that do hire people to kind of be their extra eyes in the sky, so to speak. And so I think for John, while I don't think John is on the hot seat after losing the AFC Championship game, I think it's a little uncomfortable. I think it's probably when we talked to him at the end of the season presser, he said he hadn't had his meeting with Steve Bisciotti yet. He said they had text, but he said they hadn't had the meeting yet. I don't know if they've had that meeting to this point. But I do think, and this is my own kind of me just thinking of the situation in my own head, I wouldn't be surprised if it's been a little uneasy for them to talk to each other right after that game. Like I said, I don't think John's on the hot seat, but I think
You
He
think
probably had to answer some questions,
you think the seat is starting to warm up a little bit?
I'll say this. If the Ravens were to be one and done in the playoffs next year or something like that, you'd have to really I could see anything happening at the end of the season if that ends up being the case. Now, if they go to the AFC Championship game and lose again,
it's a pattern at that point, though.
It could be, and maybe you get the John and the Ravens have mutually parted ways. Maybe that's what you get. I don't think anybody will get the satisfaction of the Ravens have fired John Harbaugh, but maybe you get they've mutually parted ways. But again, it's so tough to even get to that game that I think people have this idea that moving on from John, even if we use Mike Macdonald comes in for John, and the Ravens are not only back in the AFC Championship game next year, but they're winning it, and they're potentially winning the Super Bowl. Like, progress isn't guaranteed. It's not guaranteed. It's not guaranteed for John. We don't know what's going to happen with these guys next year. But I also don't think it's a given that you just put somebody else in his spot and now they're going to go further. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
It's going to be a different formula now that you have a different head coach. So you don't know what type of final result you're going to get anymore. The NFL is a week-to-week league, a year-to-year league for sure. And especially when you're in the AFC and you got Patrick Mahomes in your conference, nobody really wants to give. I've yet to really hear anybody give the Chiefs credit for winning that game. It's all been about. And granted, I'm not sitting here saying that the Ravens didn't beat themselves, but people act like they went out there and lost to some bums. They did.
Right. A team that's essentially in their fourth Super Bowl in 5 years? I mean, hey.
They know what they're doing over there. They know what they're doing.
And that's why they continue to go back.
Exactly. So that's why it's important to not be but so emotional. I get it. It's fans, they're going to be more emotional than probably in different ways than the people that are in the castle. But yeah, with John, I don't know. He's been here for so long. He's a veteran in this league as a coach. He's won a Super Bowl. He just got out of the AFC Championship game. I don't know what it's going to take for him to be done. It may take him saying he's done, but next year, if they take a huge step back, I think something could potentially happen.
I do too. I mean, and look, at the end of the day, you got to do what you got to do to try to save your job. And if that means that you feel like you're stagnant and that somebody can help you get over the top, I know. Right. And if the Ravens have no intention on firing John Harbaugh at the moment, right? Because we know that, like you said, that could change. But at the moment, if they have no intentions on firing him, but yet he feels like he needs to do better and be better, I have no problem with him hiring a consultant to potentially help him do that. And if you were your job was on the line and you really wanted to keep your job, you'd probably do it too. That's all I'm simply saying. And John Harbaugh isn't clearly we can critique him. We do quite often. But ultimately, I think, hey, listen, if you felt like you needed some additional help, I'm completely okay with sometimes you got to be like, hey, I need some help here. You know what I mean? Like, I maybe it's me. Maybe somebody else can come in here and tell me what I'm doing wrong. You know what I mean? Now, obviously, this didn't happen, so we'll see where this goes from here. I'm simply saying that if it did happen, I don't have a problem with it. There's nothing wrong with wanting to evolve and be better and maybe getting an outside opinion on how to do that if you want to get over whatever hump that you're on.
Yeah, so. I agree. I said it on my show. I think that this is a positive for the Ravens. I think it's a positive for John. This is John, if they had made this higher, this is John saying, I see where I'm falling short. Yep. I see where I need help at. And I'm going to, because a lot of coaches are filled with pride. This is John putting his pride to the side. Now, granted, also it could be because he may feel the heat a little on his shoulder. Like, all right, I got to do something to kind of save myself at this point. And so I get that. And like I said, I think that would have been a benefit for him and the team. I just also recognized how that potentially happening gives fuel to the people who already feel a certain way about John. It just, you saw the same discourse I saw. It's just people that have been waiting for, John to get out of there, that are just like, okay, now what is he doing? And people need to understand there are a lot of things that go into being a head coach beyond just what we see on game day.
Yeah.
So I understand that John would have still had his hands full. But again, to the casual consumer, they're looking at it saying, what are you doing? What do we have this guy here for if we need him to have essentially somebody else up there to tell him how to do his job? That
correct.
I could see why people would get upset with that, but I agree. I think it would have been a positive for the Ravens.
That's all I'm saying. I'm simply just saying that, I don't have a problem with somebody saying maybe I just need a different set of eyes, and I could potentially use the help here. So hopefully we'll see how this goes. Again, it was refuted, the report that he was joining the staff. So we'll see where this goes from there. So thank you for everyone for joining us. From Cordell to me, this is Winning Drive.